When my daughter Mitchell called me a cheap bastard in front of 12 family members at Thanksgiving dinner, I smiled, excused myself from the table, and made one call to my estate attorney. By Monday morning, I had removed her completely from my $50 million inheritance and changed the beneficiaries to charity. And that was just the beginning of my plan. Justice must be restored and arrogance punished. You won't believe what I did next. What happened next destroyed not just Mitchell, but her husband and his entire family who thought they could manipulate a broke old man into funding their luxury lifestyle. The evidence I revealed was so devastating that our family lawyer called it the most comprehensive case of financial abuse he'd seen in 30 years of practice. They had no idea I'd been documenting every insult, every demand, every moment of disrespect while quietly building a fortune they'd never see. The trap was so perfect that when it sprung, Mitchell lost not just her inheritance, but her house, her husband's business, and her standing in the community. By Christmas, the whole family learned exactly what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. I should have known something was wrong when I walked into Mitchell's dining room and saw the new $15,000 mahogany table where I was supposed to sit and be grateful for their Thanksgiving invitation. The table I'd unknowingly paid for through the emergency loan Mitchell had needed 3 months ago when her husband Peyton's construction business hit a temporary rough patch. The room was a showcase of my involuntary generosity. The crystal chandelier hanging overhead $8,500 from my savings account when Mitchell decided their old light fixture was embarrassing for entertaining. The Persian rug under my feet that had cost more than most people's cars another emergency expense when they were preparing to host Peyton's business partners. But it was the china cabinet displaying the $12,000 Waterford crystal set that really told the story. Mitchell had tearfully explained how important it was for their social standing to have proper dinnerware when Peyton's clients came for dinner. How could I say no to my only daughter's happiness? "Dad, you're just in time," Mitchell called from the kitchen, her voice carrying that practiced cheerfulness she used when she needed something. "We're about to sit down." I took my assigned seat at the far end of the table, not the head, that was reserved for Peyton, and looked around at the assembled family. Mitchell's children, my grandchildren, barely looked up from their phones. Peyton and his parents, who'd never once invited me to their house, were discussing their upcoming cruise to Europe. Mitchell's sister-in-law was showing off her new jewelry, while her husband talked about his latest business acquisition. All of them living well while treating me like the poor relation. "Grandpa Robert," said my 16-year-old grandson Tyler, finally acknowledging my presence. "Mom says you might help me with my car situation." "What car situation is that?" "Well, I'm 16 now, and I need transportation. Mom and Dad are looking at this really nice BMW for me, but they're a little short on the down payment." I looked at Mitchell, who was suddenly very interested in arranging the napkins. "How much is this BMW?" "It's only $45,000, Tyler said like he was asking for lunch money. "And it's used. Mom says you understand the importance of reliable transportation." The conversation continued around me like I wasn't there. Peyton's mother discussing their need for a new boat. Mitchell's sister-in-law mentioning their kitchen renovation plans. Everyone had projects, everyone had needs, and somehow everyone assumed I'd be contributing to their funding. "You know, Dad," Mitchell said as she brought out the turkey I'd also inadvertently paid for, "we've been thinking about taking the whole family to Aspen for Christmas. It would be such a wonderful opportunity for the kids to learn skiing." "How much would that cost?" "Well, with the cabin rental and lift tickets and equipment for everyone, probably around $25,000. But it's about family memories, you know? You can't put a price on that." I smiled and nodded, playing the role they'd written for me. The old man who should feel grateful to be included in their expensive plans. That's when Peyton's father decided to share his wisdom about family financial management. "Robert, you know what your problem is?" he said, cutting into his turkey with the precision of a man used to being heard. "You're too conservative with money. Mitchell tells us you're always worried about expenses, but you can't take it with you. Family comes first." "What do you mean?" I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. "I mean, you need to live a little. Enjoy what you've worked for." Help your family enjoy it too. What's the point of saving money if you're not going to spend it on the people you love? Mitchell nodded enthusiastically. Dad's always been cautious about money. He still drives that old Toyota and lives in the same house he's had for 20 years. 25 years, I corrected, since your mother and I bought it. Right. My point is, Dad, you act like you're poor, but you have a decent pension from the plant. You could afford to be more generous with family. Peyton leaned forward, warming to the theme. Robert, Mitchell's told me about your concerns about spending, but this is your family. We're not asking you to be irresponsible. We're asking you to invest in relationships. I looked around the table at 12 faces staring at me expectantly. 12 people who had assumptions about my finances, my obligations, and my character. 12 people who were about to learn how wrong they'd been about everything. You know what, Peyton? I said quietly. You're absolutely right. I've been too conservative. Mitchell's face lit up. Really, Dad? Really? In fact, I think I've been so focused on saving money that I've forgotten what's really important. Exactly. Peyton, his mother chimed in. Money is just paper. Family is forever. That's when Mitchell made the mistake that would cost her everything. Honestly, Dad, she said with a laugh that was supposed to sound affectionate but came out condescending, sometimes you act like such a cheap bastard. It's embarrassing when we're trying to do nice things as a family. The words hung in the warm air between us like smoke from fire that had just started burning. 12 people around the table, and not one of them recognized that Mitchell had just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. I stood up slowly, my napkin falling to the floor beside the chair that had cost me $800 during their dining room emergency last spring. You know what, Mitchell? You're right. I'm a cheap bastard. The cheapest bastard you'll ever know. I walked toward the door, then turned back to look at the table full of people who'd been spending my money while insulting my character. Enjoy your dinner. It's the last one I'll be paying for. But what they didn't know was that I had been planning this moment for months. The 15-minute drive to my house felt like the longest journey of my life. I took the scenic route down Oakwood Avenue, past the bank where I'd withdrawn the money for Mitchell's emergency home repairs 6 months ago, past the car dealership where I'd co-signed the loan for Peyton's new truck, past the jewelry store where I'd bought Mitchell's anniversary gift last month. The numbers started rolling through my head like a broken slot machine, each calculation more devastating than the last. 7 years since Mitchell's mother died. 7 years of being the family's go-to funding source while they treated me like an obligation instead of father. Mitchell's house down payment when they had to move quickly on their dream home, $85,000 from my retirement savings. The kitchen renovation that was essential for Mitchell's happiness, $47,000 charged to credit cards I was still paying off. Peyton's business equipment when his construction company needed emergency expansion capital, $67,000 from my investment account. But it wasn't just the big expenses. There were Tyler's private school tuition payments I'd been covering for 3 years, $18,000 per year, because public school was inadequate for a child with his potential. Mitchell's car payments when her old vehicle was unreliable for family transportation, $650 per month for 48 months. The family vacation to Hawaii I'd funded last summer because the kids deserved to see the world, $23,000 for 10 days of watching them ignore me while enjoying my generosity. I pressed the accelerator harder than necessary as I turned onto my street. My 25-year-old Toyota Camry responded with the same reliable purr it had delivered for 340,000 miles. The car Mitchell was embarrassed to be seen in. The car that represented everything they misunderstood about me. Pine Street, where I'd taken out a second mortgage to help Mitchell and Peyton with their temporary financial difficulties 2 years ago. $125,000 that I was still paying off at 72 years old. Elm Avenue, where my financial advisor's office had tried to talk me out of liquidating investments to fund my daughter's lifestyle. The total was staggering when I finally calculated it honestly. $487,000 over 7 years. Nearly $500,000 I'd given to people who thought I was a cheap bastard. What they didn't know, what nobody knew except my attorney and my financial advisor, was that their cheap bastard grandfather was worth $50.3 million. The Toyota plant, where I'd worked for 37 years, hadn't just provided a pension. It had provided stock options that I'd quietly accumulated and held while living modestly. The small house Mitchell was embarrassed by sat on 43 acres of land that had been rezoned for commercial development. The boring investments they mocked had been compounding for decades while I lived off my pension and watched my net worth climb. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the garage for several minutes, looking at the financial statements I'd been hiding in my briefcase. Portfolio balance: $50,347,000. Real estate value: $3.2 million. Annual investment income: $2. $4 million. More money than Mitchell's family could spend in 10 lifetimes, and they just call me a cheap bastard for not buying a 16-year-old a BMW. Inside my modest house, I walked to my office and pulled out the manila folder I'd been building for months. Bank statements showing every transfer to Mitchell's family. Credit card bills documenting gifts and loans that were never repaid. A paper trail of 7 years of funding people who saw me as an ATM instead of a father. My phone buzzed with a text from Mitchell. "Dad, I'm sorry if that came out wrong. You know I didn't mean anything by it. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long moment, then set the phone aside without responding. I had more important calls to make. I opened my laptop and pulled up my contact list. First call: Richard Morrison, my estate attorney who'd been managing my wealth quietly for 20 years. Second call: Patricia Chun, my financial advisor who'd helped me build a fortune while living like a middle-class retiree. The third call would be the most important one I'd ever made. That's when my phone rang with the call that would change everything. At 10:47 a.m. the next morning, my phone rang while I was reviewing investment statements in my kitchen. Mitchell's name flashed on the screen like a warning beacon. Perfect timing. I'd been expecting this call. "Dad, we really need to talk about yesterday." Mitchell's voice carried that tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable while delivering ultimatums. "I think there was a misunderstanding." "What kind of misunderstanding?" I kept my voice calm, neutral. "Well, when I called you a cheap bastard, I was just joking around. You know how family teases each other. I didn't mean anything serious by it." I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the garden where my wife had planted roses 25 years ago. The garden Mitchell had suggested I update with something more modern last spring. "Mitchell, what exactly do you think I misunderstood?" A pause. I could hear her breathing, probably trying to figure out how to spin yesterday's events in her favor. "Dad, I think you took what I said too personally. We were all having such a nice time, and then you just left without even saying goodbye." The kids were confused. The kids didn't look up from their phones long enough to notice I was there. That's not fair. You know, teenagers are just distracted by technology. "Mitchell, Tyler asked me to buy him a $45,000 BMW before dessert was served." That doesn't sound distracted. That sounds entitled. "Dad, Tyler's a good kid who deserves nice things. We're not asking you to buy him a Ferrari. A reliable car is a necessity for a young person." I opened my calculator app and started adding numbers while she talked. 7 years of Mitchell's necessities had cost me nearly $500,000. "Mitchell, can you help me understand something? When you call me a cheap bastard in front of the entire family, what message were you trying to send?" "I wasn't trying to send any message. I was just expressing frustration that you're always so worried about money when we're trying to plan nice family activities. Like the $25,000 Aspen vacation. Dad, that's a family investment. The kids would have memories that last a lifetime. And who would be paying for these lifetime memories? Well, obviously the family would contribute what they could, but you're in the best position to help make it happen." There it was. The assumption that had been driving 7 years of exploitation. I was in the best position to help because they decided I should be their personal funding source. "Mitchell, I'm curious about something. What do you think my financial situation actually is?" "I don't know exactly, Dad. You've always been private about money. But you have your pension and you own the house, so you're comfortable enough to help family when we need it." Comfortable enough. What does that mean in dollar terms? "Dad, I don't know why you're interrogating me about this. The point is, you can afford to be more generous than you are. More generous than I am." "Mitchell, how much money do you think I've given your family over the past 7 years?" Silence. Long, telling silence. "I don't keep track of things like that, Dad." Family doesn't keep score. I do keep track. Would you like to know the total? Dad, this conversation is getting ridiculous. Money isn't the issue here. The issue is that you're treating your family like strangers instead of people who love you. People who love me. Mitchell, yesterday you called me a cheap bastard in front of 12 people. Your husband's father lectured me about how to spend my money. Your son demanded a BMW. How exactly does that demonstrate love? Dad, you're blowing this completely out of proportion. We're family. We're supposed to be able to speak honestly with each other. Honestly. Okay, let me be honest with you. I've given your family $487,000 over the past 7 years. Emergency loans, house payments, car payments, school tuition, vacations, furniture, appliances, and gifts. Nearly $500,000 to people who think I'm too cheap. The silence that followed was absolute. That number can't be right, Mitchell finally whispered. Every penny is documented. Bank statements, credit card bills, loan agreements. 7 years of funding a family that sees me as an obligation instead of father. Dad, that's not true. We love you. We appreciate everything you've done. Mitchell, your son wants a BMW. Your husband wants me to fund his business expansion. You want a $25,000 vacation. At what point does appreciation turn into a business relationship? You're twisting everything around. Yes, we've asked for help sometimes, but that's what families do. We support each other. When have you supported me, Mitchell? The question hung between us like smoke from a fire that was spreading. What do you mean? I mean, when was the last time you visited me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you called to check on my health? When was the last time you invited me to dinner without asking for money? That's not fair, Dad. I'm busy with my own family. I have responsibilities. And what about your responsibility to your father? I do care about you, but you're independent. You don't need help the way we do. I don't need help. Mitchell, I'm 72 years old. I lost your mother 7 years ago. I eat dinner alone every night in a house that's too big for one person. But you're right, I don't need financial help. Dad, if you're lonely, you should tell us. We can include you more in family activities. Include me more? Mitchell, yesterday I was included in a family dinner where I was insulted and treated like a vending machine. Is that the kind of inclusion you mean? You're being dramatic. One comment doesn't define our entire relationship. You're right. One comment doesn't define our relationship. 7 years of comments define our relationship. 7 years of assumptions about my money and my obligations. 7 years of treating me like an ATM instead of a father. My voice dropped to something I didn't recognize. Mitchell, I want you to listen very carefully. This conversation is over. We're done pretending to be family. Dad, you can't just. We're done, I repeated and ended the call. I set the phone down carefully on the counter, my hands surprisingly steady. Around me, the kitchen felt different somehow, like a weight had been lifted from the air itself. I walked to my filing cabinet and pulled out the folder I'd been avoiding for months. Financial statements, investment portfolios, real estate valuations, documentation of a fortune that Mitchell would never see. Time to make some changes to my estate planning. They had just given me the final piece I needed to destroy them all. The documents spread across my dining room table looked like evidence at a crime scene. 7 years of bank statements, each one showing transfers to Mitchell's family. Credit card bills documenting gifts and emergency loans that were never repaid. A paper trail of nearly $500,000 given to people who call me a cheap bastard. I pulled out my calculator and started adding methodically, even though I knew the numbers by heart. Mitchell's house down payment, $85,000. Kitchen renovation, $47,000. Peyton's business equipment, $67,000. Tyler's private school, $54,000 over 3 years. Car payments, $31,200. Vacations, furniture, appliances, and countless smaller emergencies, $202,800. Grand total, $487,000. Nearly $500,000 to a family that thought I was too poor to buy my grandson a BMW. But there was another set of documents on the table. Portfolio statements showing my real net worth, $50.3 million. Real estate appraisals valuing my modest property at $3.2 million. Annual investment income statements showing I earn more in dividends each year than Peyton made running his construction business. I sat back in my chair, looking at the two piles of papers that told the complete story of my relationship with Mitchell's family. On one side, evidence of their greed and disrespect. On the other side, evidence of wealth they couldn't imagine. My phone buzzed with a text from Peyton. "Robert, Mitchell told me about your conversation. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Can we get together and talk this through man to man?" I ignored the message and reached for my phone to make the first call that would change everything. "Morrison Estate Planning. This is Richard." "Richard, it's Robert Chun. I need to schedule an emergency meeting to revise my will completely." "Of course, Robert. What changes are we making?" "I'm removing Mitchell and her family entirely from my estate. Everything goes to charity." Richard was quiet for a moment. "Robert, that's a significant change. Are you certain about this?" "I've never been more certain about anything in my life." "Can you be here at 2 p.m.? I'll be there." My second call was to Patricia Chun, my financial advisor. "Patricia, it's Robert. I need to restructure my accounts to remove Mitchell as beneficiary on everything." "Robert, what's happened?" "Mitchell's family has been treating me like their personal ATM while calling me a cheap bastard behind my back. Yesterday, they did it to my face." Patricia had been managing my investments for 15 years. She knew how I'd built my fortune through careful planning and modest living. She also knew how much I'd been giving to Mitchell. "Robert, I've been worried about the money you've been sending to Mitchell. $487,000 is a significant portion of your wealth." "It's less than 1% of my wealth, Patricia." "That's not the point." "What is the point?" "The point is that I've been funding people who have no respect for me. People who think I'm poor and pathetic and should be grateful for their attention." "What do you want to do?" "I want to protect my assets from people who see me as a source of funding rather than a father. And I want to set up a charitable foundation that will do more good than anything Mitchell's family would ever do with my money." "I can help you with that." "But Robert, are you sure you want to cut them off completely?" "Patricia, yesterday my 16-year-old grandson asked me to buy him a $45,000 BMW. When I didn't immediately agree, my daughter called me a cheap bastard in front of the entire family. Jesus, they have no idea that their cheap bastard grandfather is worth $50 million. And now they never will." Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "Robert, what if Mitchell realizes her mistake? What if she apologizes? Then she'll learn that some mistakes have permanent consequences." I hung up and looked at my phone, which was lighting up with messages from Mitchell, Peyton, and various family members who'd apparently heard about our misunderstanding. But I had one more call to make. The most important call of all. Tomorrow's family gathering would be their last as a family. Saturday morning, I received a text from Mitchell that made me smile. "Dad, I've been thinking about our conversation, and I realize I owe you an apology. Would you come to lunch today? Just family. I want to clear the air." "Perfect. I've been hoping for exactly this opportunity." Of course, I texted back. "What time?" 1 p.m. "And Dad, thank you for being understanding. I know I haven't always been the daughter you deserved. I spent the morning preparing for what would be the most important meal of my life. Not preparing food, preparing evidence. I printed financial statements, investment reports, and real estate valuations. I organized them into neat folders, one for each family member who would be there. But the centerpiece of my preparation was a single document. My new will, signed yesterday and notarized by Richard Morrison. A will that left my entire $50.3 million estate to various charities, with specific instructions that Mitchell's family should be informed of what they would have inherited if they treated me with respect. At 12:45 p.m., I loaded my briefcase and drove to Mitchell's house for the last time as her father. The scene was exactly what I'd expected. Mitchell had prepared what she probably thought was my favorite meal, pot roast and mashed potatoes, the kind of simple food that reinforced their image of me as a simple man with simple means. Peyton was wearing his nice shirt, the one he used for important business meetings. The grandchildren were present, but distracted, clearly having been told to be extra nice to Grandpa. "Dad, I'm so glad you came," Mitchell said, giving me a hug that felt rehearsed. I've been feeling terrible about Thursday night. Have you? Oh, yes. I realize how my comment must have sounded. I was just frustrated about the family finances, but I should never have taken it out on you. We sat down at the dining room table I'd purchased, using the china I'd funded, and the house I'd helped them buy. The irony was perfect. Dad, Peyton said, clearing his throat like he was about to give a speech. Mitchell and I have been talking, and we want you to know how much we appreciate everything you've done for our family. Everything I've done. What exactly do you think I've done? Well, you've helped us through some tough financial times. You've been there when we needed support. You've been a generous grandfather to the kids. Generous grandfather. Peyton, how much money do you think I've given your family over the past 7 years? Mitchell and Peyton exchanged glances. Dad, we don't really keep track of things like that. Duh. Would you like to know the number? If you want to tell us, Mitchell said carefully. I opened my briefcase and pulled out the first folder. $487,000. Nearly $500,000 over 7 years. The room went completely silent. Even the grandchildren looked up from their phones. That number includes house payments, car payments, school tuition, business investments, and vacations. It does not include gifts, meals, or other smaller expenses. Peyton's face had gone white. Robert, I had no idea it was that much. No idea. Peyton, who do you think paid for the kitchen renovation that cost $47,000? Well, we took out a loan. For me. Who do you think paid Tyler's private school tuition for 3 years? We assumed you were just helping with part of it. All of it. Every semester for 3 years. Who do you think funded your business expansion? Robert, I'm paying that back. It's a loan, not a gift. I pulled out the loan agreement Peyton had signed. This document says the loan was for $30,000. I actually gave you $67,000. Where's the other $37,000? Peyton couldn't answer. Mitchell, who do you think paid for your family vacation to Hawaii last summer? Dad, we contributed to that vacation. You contributed $800. I paid $23,000 for airfare, hotels, meals, and activities. I pulled out more documents. Bank statements, credit card bills, receipts for 7 years of funding their lifestyle. Now I want to show you something else, I said, opening the second folder. This is my actual financial situation. I laid out my investment portfolio statements, account balances, stock holdings, real estate valuations, annual income reports. Mitchell stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. Dad, these numbers, this says you're worth $50.3 million, plus real estate worth another $3.2 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Peyton was the first to speak. Robert, if you're worth that much, why do you live like a poor man? Because I'm not interested in impressing people with my wealth. I'm interested in seeing how people treat me when they think I don't have any. Mitchell's voice was barely a whisper. Dad, we had no idea. No idea. Mitchell, for 7 years you've treated me like a burden. You complained about my modest lifestyle, my old car, my simple house. You've taken nearly $500,000 from me, while making it clear that you were embarrassed by me. That's not true, Dad. We love you. Love me. Mitchell, 3 days ago you called me a cheap bastard in front of 12 people because I hesitated to fund another family vacation. I pulled out the final document. This is my new will, signed yesterday. My entire estate, $53.5 million, goes to charity. Mitchell's face went white. Dad, you can't be serious. The Robertson Foundation will fund scholarships for underprivileged children. The money will go to people who will appreciate education instead of demanding BMWs. Tyler spoke up for the first time. Grandpa, you're giving away $50 million? I'm giving it to people who won't call me a cheap bastard for wanting to make a difference in the world. Peyton tried one last desperate play. Robert, we can change. We can do better. Give us another chance. Peyton, yesterday your son asked me for a $45,000 car. Your wife called me a cheap bastard. Your father lectured me about being too conservative with money. What exactly would change? We'd treat you with the respect you deserve. The respect I deserve. You mean you'd be nice to me because you found out I'm rich? Mitchell started crying. Dad, please. We're family. Money shouldn't matter. You're right, Mitchell. Money shouldn't matter. That's why I lived modestly for 72 years. That's why I drove an old car and kept a simple house. I wanted to know who loved me for who I am, not what I have. I stood up and gathered my papers. Now I know. Dad, wait. Please don't do this. The kids, think about the kids. I looked at Tyler and his sister Madison, both staring at me with expressions I'd never seen before. Not affection or respect, but calculation. They were already trying to figure out how to get some of my money. I'm thinking about the kids. I'm thinking about the lesson they need to learn about treating people with respect regardless of their financial status. I walked toward the door, then turned back for one final statement. Mitchell, you call me a cheap bastard. You were wrong about the bastard part, but you were right about the cheap part. I am cheap. I'm so cheap that I refuse to pay $50 million for the privilege of being disrespected by my own family. I left them sitting at their expensive table in their expensive house, finally understanding exactly what they'd lost. But the most devastating consequence was still coming. 3 months later, the dominoes were still falling in the most satisfying way possible. The news of my charitable donation had spread through the community like wildfire, triggering consequences that Mitchell's family never saw coming. The first consequence was social. Within weeks of my donation announcement, everyone in town knew the story. The modest retiree who'd been secretly wealthy while his family treated him like a burden. The family who'd called their millionaire father a cheap bastard and lost a $50 million inheritance as a result. Mitchell's social circle evaporated overnight. The other parents at Tyler's private school I'd been funding were horrified to learn how my family had treated me. The country club where Peyton had been trying to build business connections suddenly found his membership application under review indefinitely. But the social consequences were nothing compared to the financial devastation. Without my monthly subsidies, Mitchell and Peyton's carefully constructed lifestyle collapsed like a house of cards. The mortgage payments I'd been quietly covering became impossible to manage. Peyton's business, which had been surviving on my investments, couldn't pay its suppliers. Tyler's private school education ended abruptly when the tuition checks stopped coming. My phone rang on a Wednesday morning in March. Mitchell's name on the screen. Dad, we need to talk. Please. What about, Mitchell? We're losing the house. Peyton's business is failing. Tyler had to transfer to public school. Dad, we're going to lose everything. I'm sorry to hear that. That's it? You're sorry to hear that? Mitchell, you call me a cheap bastard. Now you're learning what it's like when the cheap bastard stops paying your bills. Dad, I apologize for that. I was wrong. I said things I didn't mean. You meant them when you said them. You just don't like the consequences. Please, Dad. The kids are suffering. They don't understand why their grandfather abandoned them. I didn't abandon them, Mitchell. I stopped funding people who don't respect me. There's a difference. We respect you now. We understand what we did wrong. You respect my money. That's not the same thing. That's not fair. We love you. Mitchell, if you'd loved me, you wouldn't have needed to discover my wealth to treat me with dignity. Dad, please. I'm begging you. Give us another chance. I looked out my window at the rose garden where my wife had taught me about unconditional love. Real love. The kind that didn't come with financial conditions or social calculations. Mitchell, I gave you 7 years and $500,000 worth of chances. You used every one of them to take advantage of my generosity while making it clear that you were embarrassed by me. We can change. We can be the family you deserve. You had the opportunity to be the family I deserved when you thought I was poor. You chose to be the family you thought would benefit from my money. Dad, what do you want from us? I want you to understand that respect isn't something you can turn on when you discover someone has money. Respect is something you show to people regardless of their financial status. We understand that now. No, Mitchell, you understand that your disrespect cost you $50 million. That's not the same as understanding respect. I hung up and blocked her number. 2 weeks later, Peyton's construction business declared bankruptcy. The following month, Mitchell and Peyton lost their house to foreclosure. Tyler and Madison transferred to the public schools they'd been too good for when I was paying for private education. But the story had one more twist that made everything perfect. 6 months after I'd cut them off, I received a call from Richard Morrison, my estate attorney. "Robert, I have some interesting news about your daughter's situation." "What kind of news?" "Mitchell has been telling people around town that you're mentally incompetent and that she's going to contest your will." "On what grounds?" "She's claiming that no rational person would give away $50 million to spite their family. She's suggesting that you're not mentally capable of making financial decisions." I almost laughed. "Richard, what does she think that will accomplish?" "She thinks she can have your will declared invalid and inherit your money as your next of kin." "And what do you think about her chances?" "Robert, you've been managing a $50 million portfolio for decades. You've made strategic investments, built a charitable foundation, and demonstrated complete mental competency. Her case would be laughed out of court. But let me guess, she's already spent money on lawyers?" "According to my sources, she's borrowed against her remaining assets to pay for legal fees. She's convinced she can win back her inheritance through the courts." The irony was perfect. Mitchell was spending money. She didn't have to fight for money she'd lost through her own behavior. "Richard, let her try. I have 7 years of documented evidence showing exactly why I changed my will. Bank statements, text messages, and witness testimony about how they treated me. There's something else, Robert. The publicity around your charitable donation has inspired other wealthy individuals to make similar gifts. Your foundation is becoming a model for how to use wealth responsibly. That's the best news I've heard all year. Your donation has generated over $5 million in additional charitable giving from other donors who were inspired by your story." I hung up the phone feeling something I hadn't experienced in years: complete peace with my decisions. That evening, I had dinner with my new family, the board members of the Robertson Foundation, who'd become closer to me than my blood relatives had ever been. People who appreciated my wisdom, respected my values, and never once asked me for money. Martha Rodriguez, the foundation's director, raised her glass during dessert. "Robert, I want to toast the impact you've made. In 6 months, we've provided scholarships to 43 underprivileged students. We've funded 3 community centers. We've given dozens of kids opportunities they never would have had." "That's what money should do," I said. "It should create opportunities, not entitlement." "Have you heard from your daughter lately?" asked Dr. Patricia Williams, our education advisor. "She's trying to contest my will on grounds of mental incompetence. After you built a $50 million fortune through careful planning, apparently she thinks no sane person would choose charity over family." "She's right," said Martha. "No sane person would choose charity over family. But you didn't choose charity over family. You chose charity over people who treated you like an ATM." As I drove home that night, I passed Mitchell's old house, now owned by a young couple who'd bought it at foreclosure auction. The house I'd helped purchase, where I'd been called a cheap bastard for wanting to be treated with respect. The new owners had planted flowers in the garden and put up a swing set for their children. It looked like a home where a family lived and loved each other, rather than a showcase for wealth they hadn't earned. At 73 years old, I'd finally learned the difference between family and relatives. Family are the people who love you when you have nothing to offer them. Relatives are the people who love what you can do for them. Mitchell had been my relative for 7 years. The people at my foundation were my family. And my family was doing incredible things with the money that Mitchell thought she deserved for calling me a cheap bastard. Some people called what I did cruel. I called it educational. Mitchell learned that actions have consequences. Tyler and Madison learned that respect isn't optional. Peyton learned that treating people badly has a cost. And 43 scholarship recipients learned that education can change everything. That seemed like a fair trade to me. So tell me, was I wrong to cut off my daughter's family completely? Should I have given them another chance after they learned about my wealth? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story inspired you to value respect over money, hit that subscribe button. Sometimes the most expensive lesson is the one about how much respect is really worth.
If this story got you thinking, go ahead and hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that hit deep, and tap the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. And hey, if you know someone who needs to hear this one, share it with them. Thanks for watching.